James Watson hadn't always believed in love at first sight. He was a pragmatist, rooted in the belief that relationships were built over time, brick by brick, through shared experiences, mutual respect, and effort. But that belief crumbled the moment he met Emily Turner. It was a warm afternoon in the summer of 1996, the air buzzing with the vibrancy of the city. James had just started his first real job as a marketing consultant at a small but promising firm in downtown Chicago. He was 24, fresh out of college, and eager to make his mark on the world. The job came with long hours, little pay, and a mountain of expectations. But James wasn't one to shy away from hard work. After all, he had always been determined, even as a boy, to rise above the modest life his parents had worked so hard to provide. James wasn't looking for love. He barely had time to look up from his stack of files or his endless client calls. His days were a blur of meetings and proposals, and his nights were often spent in the quiet confines of his small apartment, thinking of ways to climb the corporate ladder. At that point in his life, his ambitions were his only companion. But that all changed the day he stepped into the Blue Leaf, a quaint cafe just down the street from his office, seeking a brief respite from the whirlwind of work. As he stood in line, waiting for his order, he glanced around the cafe, and that's when he saw her, Emily. She was sitting at a table near the window, sunlight filtering through the glass, casting a warm glow over her. She was laughing, her head tilted slightly back, her long auburn hair catching the light in a way that made it seem like it was on fire. Her laughter was infectious, and James found himself smiling without even realizing it. There was something about her that commanded his attention. She was beautiful, no doubt, with her bright hazel eyes and radiant smile, but it was more than just her looks. It was the way she carried herself, the energy she radiated, that drew him in. She seemed so alive, so present, as if the world outside didn't matter, as long as she was surrounded by the people at her table. James felt a strange pull toward her, something he couldn't quite explain. For a moment, he just stood there, captivated, watching her, completely oblivious to the fact that the barista was calling his name for his order. It wasn't until someone behind him cleared their throat that James snapped back to reality, quickly grabbing his coffee and muttering a hasty apology. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. He couldn't get her out of his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her smile, heard her laugh. He didn't even know her name, but he felt like he had to know her, had to be a part of whatever it was that made her seem so luminous. Over the next few days, James found himself going back to the Blue Leaf more often than he would admit, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. Sometimes she was there, always with a group of friends or colleagues, and sometimes she wasn't. But every time he saw her, his heart would race just a little faster. He'd even linger near the counter longer than necessary, his eyes subtly scanning the room, waiting for her to walk through the door. It was on one particularly busy Friday afternoon, about a week after that first encounter, when fate finally intervened. James was sitting at one of the small tables near the back, sipping his coffee and trying to focus on a report for a client. He wasn't paying much attention to the people coming and going until he heard that laugh, the same one that had haunted his thoughts for days. He looked up, and there she was, standing in line, this time alone. His heart skipped a beat. Now was his chance. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, James gathered his courage and approached her. He felt like a teenager all over again, awkward and unsure of himself, but he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. "Excuse me," he began, clearing his throat to hide the nervousness in his voice. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I've seen you here a few times, and I just wanted to say hi. I'm James." Emily turned to face him, her hazel eyes lighting up with curiosity and amusement. "Hi, James," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "I'm Emily. Nice to meet you." And just like that, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about their jobs. Emily was working as a graphic designer at an advertising agency nearby, and they quickly discovered they shared a love for art, literature, and a particular fondness for the little cafe they both frequented. One coffee date turned into two, then three, and before long, they were inseparable. They spent hours talking about their dreams, their fears, and the things that made them who they were. Emily had a way of making James feel like he could be himself, like he didn't have to wear the polished, professional mask he often donned at work. With her, he could laugh, he could dream, he could breathe. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Their relationship deepened, and James realized that he had never felt this way about anyone before. He had fallen hard for Emily, and he was ready to spend the rest of his life with her. On a cool spring evening, at the very cafe where they had first met, James got down on one knee and asked Emily to marry him. She said yes, tears of joy in her eyes, and their life together officially began. The marriage and family years. The early years of their marriage were blissful. James's career continued to flourish, and Emily found success in her creative field. They bought a charming house in the suburbs, the kind of house they had both dreamed of, a place where they could start a family. It wasn't long before their first child, Ethan, was born. He had his mother's hazel eyes and his father's determination, and from the moment he entered their lives, he was the center of their world. 2 years later, Sarah arrived, and their family felt complete. She was as vivacious as her mother, with a quick wit and an adventurous spirit that kept James on his toes. The Watson household was filled with love and laughter, the sound of children's footsteps echoing through the halls, and the constant buzz of activity that comes with raising two energetic kids. James and Emily settled into their roles as parents, navigating the challenges of balancing work and family life with surprising ease. They were a team, each supporting the other through late nights, diaper changes, and school plays. There were arguments, of course, like in any marriage, but they always found their way back to each other. Their love was the anchor that kept them steady, even in the stormiest of times. As the years passed, their children grew, and so did their love for each other. Ethan excelled in school and sports, while Sarah developed a passion for music and the arts. James couldn't have been prouder of the family they had built. He often looked at Emily, watching her interact with their children, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had everything he could ever want: a successful career, 2 wonderful kids, and a wife who still took his breath away after all these years. To the outside world, the Watsons were the perfect family. They hosted barbecues in the summer, went on family vacations to the mountains and the beach, and were active in their community. James loved nothing more than coming home after a long day at work to find Emily and the kids waiting for him. The smell of dinner wafting through the air and the sound of laughter filling the rooms. For James, life was good. They had been married for over 20 years, and while the passion of their early days had faded into something softer and more comfortable, he never doubted for a second that Emily was his forever. He was a man content with the life he had built. But even the strongest foundations can crack. Sometimes, it happens so slowly that you don't notice the damage until it's too late. As James looked back on the early years of their marriage, it was hard to pinpoint the exact moment when things started to change. At first, the shifts in Emily's behavior seemed so small, so insignificant, that they hardly registered in his mind. But now, after everything that had happened, he couldn't help but wonder if he had missed the signs early on, or worse, if he had chosen to ignore them. It had been nearly 23 years since they had exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. They had weathered many storms together, from the sleepless nights with newborn Ethan to the teenage years of rebellion when Sarah had tested their patience at every turn. Through it all, James had believed they were a team, an unbreakable unit built on trust, respect, and love. But somewhere along the way, that foundation had begun to crack. The first real sign that something was wrong had come about 3 years ago. It was their 20th wedding anniversary, a milestone James had been looking forward to for months. He had planned a surprise weekend getaway to the same bed and breakfast they had visited on their honeymoon, a picturesque and nestled in the mountains where the view from the balcony seemed to stretch on forever. It had always been one of their favorite places, a place where they could reconnect and escape the pressures of everyday life. James had been practically buzzing with excitement as the date approached. He'd made all the arrangements, keeping everything a secret so he could surprise Emily. He could picture her face when he finally told her, imagining the way her eyes would light up with joy and appreciation. After 20 years together, they both deserved a break, a chance to reignite the spark that had sustained them for so long. But when James revealed the surprise, Emily's reaction wasn't what he had expected. Instead of excitement, her face fell, her smile fading into something that resembled guilt. "Oh, James, I don't know if I can take time off from work," she had said, her voice hesitant. "Things have been so crazy lately at the office, and I've got this big project I'm working on. I just don't think it's a good time." James had been disappointed, of course, but he hadn't pushed her. He trusted her completely, and if work was truly that demanding, he didn't want to add to her stress. After all, Emily had always been driven, and he admired her dedication to her career. They had built a life together by supporting each other's ambitions, and this was no different, or so he thought at the time. What James didn't know then, what he couldn't have known, was that Emily's refusal to take the trip wasn't just about work. It was about something, or rather, someone else entirely. As time went on, the distance between them grew. It was subtle at first, like a shadow that crept in at the edges of their lives, unnoticed until it was too late. Emily started working longer hours, often coming home late, tired and distracted. She claimed it was because of the new responsibilities she had taken on at her advertising agency. James believed her without question. After all, they were both busy with their careers, and they had always prided themselves on being supportive partners. He had no reason to doubt her. But it wasn't just the long hours that bothered James. It was the way Emily seemed to be slipping away from him, little by little. She was distant, both physically and emotionally. Conversations that used to flow effortlessly between them were now stilted and awkward, filled with long pauses where neither of them seemed to know what to say. She spent more time on her phone, often texting late into the night or stepping outside to take calls she claimed were work-related. When James asked her about it, she would smile and reassure him that everything was fine. But everything didn't feel fine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, even though he had no concrete evidence to support it. There were nights when he would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was just being paranoid. He hated feeling this way, suspicious, anxious, like he didn't know his own wife anymore. He had always prided himself on being a rational, level-headed man. But now, doubts were beginning to creep in. James tried to push those doubts aside. He convinced himself that every marriage went through rough patches, especially after so many years together. He chalked up Emily's distance to stress and exhaustion, reasoning that once things settled down at work, she would come back to him. He had to believe that. He had to believe that the woman he had loved for more than 2 decades would never betray him. Then came the business trip. Emily had mentioned it casually one evening over dinner, as if it were no big deal. She had been selected to attend a 3-day conference in New York for work, an opportunity she described as important for her career. James hadn't thought much of it at first. Emily had been on business trips before, and he had never questioned her about them. They were both professionals, and travel came with the territory. But something about this trip felt different. For one thing, Emily had been unusually secretive about the details. When James asked where she was staying or what the conference was about, her answers were vague and hurried, as if she didn't want to discuss it. She also seemed oddly nervous in the days leading up to her departure, double-checking her phone constantly and jumping whenever a notification came through. James had tried to brush it off, but the nagging feeling in his gut refused to go away. The night before she left, as Emily packed her suitcase, James couldn't help but notice how distracted she seemed. She barely spoke to him, her mind seemingly elsewhere, and when she did, it was with a tone that felt distant, almost mechanical. James had kissed her goodbye at the door, watching as she drove off to the airport, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. 3 days later, Emily returned home from the trip, but things were not the same. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and even less interested in spending time together. James asked her how the conference went, but her response was brief and unenthusiastic. It was as if she couldn't wait to put the whole thing behind her. She offered no details, no funny stories about her colleagues, nothing that would indicate she had even been to a professional event at all. That was when James knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. He tried to push the thoughts out of his mind, but they kept circling back, each new piece of strange behavior adding to the puzzle. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the business trip that didn't feel right. Everything was pointing toward one horrible conclusion. Still, he wasn't ready to face it. In the months that followed, James and Emily's relationship continued to deteriorate. The easy, comfortable rhythm they had once shared was gone, replaced by tension and awkwardness. They barely spoke outside of the essentials: who was picking up groceries, what time Ethan needed to be at soccer practice, when Sarah's music recital was. It was as if they were living parallel lives, two people occupying the same space but completely disconnected. James couldn't help but feel like he was losing his wife, piece by piece. She was slipping through his fingers, and no matter what he did, he couldn't seem to hold on to her. He suggested they go on a vacation together, just the two of them, to try and reconnect, but Emily always had an excuse. Work was too busy, the kids needed her, or she simply wasn't interested. It was around this time that James began noticing Emily's increased focus on her appearance. She started going to the gym more frequently, buying new clothes, and spending extra time in front of the mirror before leaving the house. When he complimented her, she would brush it off, barely acknowledging his words. The changes were subtle, but to James, they felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Every day, the doubt gnawed at him a little more. Every glance at her phone, every unexplained absence, every cold shoulder chipped away at his trust. But he still couldn't bring himself to confront her. Maybe he didn't want to know the truth. Maybe, deep down, he was afraid of what that truth would mean. For their marriage, for their family, for the life they had built together. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether you're ready for it or not. The holiday season approached, and with it came a familiar whirlwind of activity. For James, it had always been a time of joy and togetherness. A chance to reconnect with family, to celebrate traditions that had been passed down for generations. But this year felt different. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and the joyous spirit that usually accompanied the holidays seemed to be lost in the shadows of their crumbling marriage. Emily had become increasingly withdrawn. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt eerily quiet. She spent long hours at the office, often coming home late, and when she was home, her mind seemed to be elsewhere. The children were excited about the upcoming holidays, but James could barely muster the enthusiasm to join in their celebrations. He found himself dreading the family gatherings, worried about how to navigate the growing rift between him and Emily. As December unfolded, Ethan and Sarah busily planned their holiday events, excited for the break from school. They decorated the house together, stringing lights and hanging ornaments on the tree, but James felt like he was merely going through the motions. He watched his kids' joyful faces, but each smile felt like a reminder of how far away he was from the woman he had once adored. It was during this time that James decided to take matters into his own hands. He could no longer ignore the gnawing sensation in his gut. The late nights, the hushed phone conversations, the way Emily seemed to be living her life behind a wall. He needed to find out what was going on. He told himself he would confront her if he found proof of her infidelity, but he also knew he would do anything to avoid the heartbreak of that revelation. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, James sat in the living room, the glow of the Christmas lights illuminating the room in a soft, warm hue. He glanced over at Emily, who was perched on the edge of the sofa, scrolling through her phone with an expression that was a mix of concentration and irritation. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of the love he once had for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of their situation. Emily, he started hesitantly, unsure of how to approach the topic. Can we talk for a minute? I feel like, I don't know, like we've been drifting apart, and I want to understand what's happening. Emily looked up, surprise etched on her face. Now? James, I'm really busy, she said, her tone sharper than he expected. Can it wait? James's heart sank, but he pressed on, desperation fueling his words. I just need to know if everything's okay. I feel like you're not here with me anymore. You're always working or distracted, and I miss you. For a moment, Emily's defenses faltered. She seemed to soften, her gaze dropping to the floor as if searching for the right words. I'm just trying to juggle everything, James. Work is demanding, and I'm trying to keep up with the kids' schedules too, she replied, her voice quieter now. "I get that," he said, trying to maintain a level tone. "But we need to make time for each other. We used to be a team, and now it feels like we're just coexisting." She nodded, her expression conflicted. "I'll try to make more time, I promise. Just let's not do this now. It's the holidays, and we should be enjoying this time with the kids." James bit his tongue, knowing the conversation was going nowhere. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that they could work through this together, but deep down, he felt a chasm opening between them that only seemed to grow wider. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the house remained tense. James's frustration grew, fueled by the questions that gnawed at his mind. After one particularly long day at work, he found himself driving home with his heart pounding in his chest. The urge to confront Emily was overwhelming, but he needed more than just gut feelings. He needed proof. That night, after the children had gone to bed, James made the decision that would change everything. He needed to see her phone. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him at the thought, but desperation pushed him forward. If she was hiding something, he needed to know. While Emily was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, James quietly crept into the living room, where her phone lay charging on the coffee table. He hesitated for a moment, his heart racing as he picked it up. What if he found something that shattered him? But what if he didn't look and it turned out to be true? He unlocked her phone, his fingers trembling. The screen was filled with notifications from various apps, but it was the messaging app that caught his eye. He clicked on it, and his breath caught in his throat. There were dozens of messages exchanged between Emily and a contact labeled simply as Mark. James's heart raced as he scrolled through the conversation. The messages were flirtatious, filled with inside jokes and playful banter. His heart sank further with each line he read. He found himself in a vortex of emotions: betrayal, anger, and a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. Then he came across a message that made his blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you again. It's been too long." James's hands shook as he read it again, the weight of the words crashing down on him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just a friendship. This was something more, something that had been hidden from him for far too long. Just as he was processing the gravity of the situation, Emily emerged from the bathroom, her expression changing when she saw him holding her phone. "James, what are you doing?" she exclaimed, rushing forward to take it from him. James's heart raced, a mixture of fear and rage bubbling to the surface. "What's going on with you and Mark, Emily? Who is he?" Emily's face paled, her eyes widening in disbelief. "I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me?" James interrupted, his voice rising. "You've been hiding this from me. I deserve to know the truth." James's emotions spilled out in a torrent as he confronted her. He felt like he was in a dream, one where the truth was slowly being dragged into the light. Every word felt like a knife, cutting deeper into his heart as the reality of Emily's betrayal began to take hold. "James, please, just listen to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think." He couldn't believe her denial. "Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair. What kind of life are you living, Emily?" Tears welled in her eyes, but James couldn't find it in himself to comfort her. The woman he loved was standing in front of him, but she felt like a stranger. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she sobbed, the facade of control slipping. "It was just a mistake, something that happened when I was feeling lost. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep it from you and protect our family." James shook his head, the pain raw and all-consuming. "Protect our family? You've destroyed it. Do you know what this means for us? For the kids?" "I know," Emily cried, desperation flooding her voice. "I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. I was just overwhelmed. And Mark, he made me feel good about myself again. It was a stupid, stupid choice." James's heart shattered further as the realization set in. This wasn't just an emotional affair. It was everything he feared, a betrayal that cut deep into the foundation of their lives together. "And what about us? What about everything we built?" he shouted, his voice thick with emotion. "You can't just throw that away for a fling." Emily looked at him, her expression filled with regret and sadness, but the damage was done. The trust that had once been the cornerstone of their relationship lay in ruins around them, the pieces scattered and irreparable. I don't know what to say, she whispered, the fight draining from her. I messed up, James. I don't know how to fix this. At that moment, the weight of their years together bore down on James. He felt like he was watching his life unravel in front of him, a cruel twist of fate that had turned his world upside down. With a heavy heart, he knew there would be no easy way forward. I need time to think, he said, his voice breaking. He felt hollow, each word laced with an indescribable pain. I can't do this right now. As he walked away, he could feel Emily's eyes on him, full of regret and despair, but he couldn't bring himself to look back. The love that had once been so vibrant was now overshadowed by betrayal, and all he could think about was how to navigate this new, painful reality. In the following days, the house felt like a battleground. James and Emily moved around each other like strangers, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. They tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Ethan and Sarah, but every interaction felt strained, every word weighed down by unspoken hurt. James threw himself into his work, burying his pain in meetings and reports. He needed an escape from the turmoil, a place where he could regain some sense of control. But as he sat at his desk, the images of Emily with another man flashed through his mind like a slideshow he couldn't turn off. Each thought was a reminder of the life he thought they had, a life that now felt like a distant memory. He was grateful for the distractions work provided, but even the most engrossing tasks couldn't shield him from the aching loneliness that enveloped him at night. The bed felt colder without Emily beside him, and the silence that filled the room was deafening. He felt adrift, lost in a sea of emotions he didn't know how to navigate. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that James made a decision. He couldn't continue living this way, torn between the love he still felt for Emily and the betrayal that had shattered his trust. He needed to confront the reality of their situation, not just for himself but for their children, who deserved better than to grow up in a home filled with lies and resentment. The next day, he sat the kids down in the living room, steeling himself for what was to come. He could see the concern etched on their faces, the way they sensed the change in the air. "Guys, there's something I need to talk to you about," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's about your mom and me." Ethan and Sarah exchanged worried glances, and James took a deep breath, preparing to share the truth. He needed them to understand, to see the reality of their situation, so they wouldn't be left in the dark. James sat on the edge of the couch, his heart racing as he prepared to share the devastating truth with his children. The living room, once a place of laughter and family gatherings, now felt heavy with anticipation and dread. Ethan and Sarah sat across from him, their youthful faces tinged with worry and confusion. He could see the questions swirling in their eyes, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him. "Dad, what's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking slightly. He was 22, old enough to understand that something was seriously wrong, but still young enough to hope it was just a temporary issue. Sarah, now 20, shifted in her seat, her brow furrowed with concern. The two of them had always been close, and the bond between them made James feel a mix of pride and sorrow at that moment. James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't protect them from the pain he had endured. They deserved the truth. "I want you both to know that your mom and I love you very much. That will never change, no matter what happens," he began, his voice shaky but resolute. "But there's something important that you need to understand about our relationship." Ethan's eyes widened, and Sarah leaned forward, their expressions shifting from concern to fear. James could feel the knot in his stomach tighten as he prepared to reveal the unthinkable. "Your mom has been seeing someone else. She's been unfaithful to me," he said, the words feeling like a physical blow as they left his lips. A stunned silence filled the room, and James could see the shock register on their faces. He glanced down at his hands, willing himself to hold it together. It was one thing to face the truth himself, but another to share it with the people he loved most. "Dad, are you serious?" Ethan finally spoke, disbelief lacing his words. "Who? How do you know?" James felt a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, and a flicker of protectiveness. I found messages on her phone, flirtatious texts, things that made it clear she's been hiding this from us, he replied, his voice growing firmer despite the storm brewing within him. It's not just a mistake. It's been ongoing, and I can't pretend it's not happening anymore. Sarah's face paled, and she turned to her brother, her voice barely a whisper. This can't be real. Mom wouldn't do that. James felt his heart crack at her words. He wished he could assure them that everything would be okay, that their family would stay intact, but he couldn't lie to them. I know this is hard to hear, but I need you both to understand that this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. What about our family? What does this mean for us? James swallowed hard, the question echoing the fears that had haunted him since the discovery. I don't know yet. I need to talk to your mom and figure out what happens next. But I want you both to know that I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Silence hung heavy in the air, and James could see the pain etched on their faces. The room felt colder, the warmth of the holiday decorations now a stark reminder of the happiness that had been shattered. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the house remained tense and uncomfortable. Ethan and Sarah avoided discussing the situation directly, but their worry was palpable. James could see the strain in their eyes, the confusion and hurt mingling with disbelief. He tried to provide a sense of normalcy, but every attempt felt hollow against the backdrop of Emily's betrayal. Christmas approached, and the family found themselves in an awkward dance around the tree, putting up ornaments and hanging lights without the joy they had once shared. The familiar songs played softly in the background, but they felt foreign, a cruel reminder of the fracture that had torn their family apart. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, James watched his children exchange glances filled with unspoken words. He could sense their anxiety and knew they were struggling to process everything that had happened. The holiday decorations loomed large, each ornament a reminder of happier times, and it broke his heart to see his children grappling with their confusion. Finally, Ethan spoke up. "Dad, what are you going to do about Mom? Are you two going to get a divorce?" James felt the weight of his son's question settle heavily on his shoulders. "I don't know yet. We need to talk. I want to understand why this happened before making any decisions," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "But I promise you both that I'm not going anywhere. You'll always have me." Sarah chimed in, her voice trembling. "But what if she doesn't want to stay? What if she chooses him over us?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud, and James felt a pang of fear at the thought. "I don't think that's how it works. Your mom loves you both, and I believe she wants to make things right. It's going to take time, and we'll need to figure this out together," he reassured them, even though doubt lingered in his mind. The conversation ended with more questions than answers, and James felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He wanted to shield them from the pain, to protect them from the fallout of Emily's choices, but he knew that was impossible. That night, after Ethan and Sarah had gone to bed, James finally found the courage to confront Emily. He had avoided it for days, letting the tension simmer, but the time had come. He needed answers, and he needed to know if they could salvage what was left of their family. He found Emily in the kitchen, staring blankly at the sink as if the dishes would offer some kind of solace. The air between them was charged, thick with the unspoken words that had hung in the space for too long. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We need to talk." She turned to him, her eyes tired and filled with remorse. "I know. I've been waiting for you to say something," she replied quietly. "I told the kids," he said, forcing the words out. "They know about the affair." Emily's face fell, and James could see the pain wash over her. "You shouldn't have told them." "I wanted to." "Wanted to what? Protect yourself?" James interrupted, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "This isn't just about you anymore, Emily. This is about our family, our children, and the life we built together. I never wanted any of this to happen," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I was overwhelmed, James. I felt like I was losing everything. My career, my identity, and in my moment of weakness, I made a terrible mistake." James felt a surge of rage at her words. "A mistake? Is that really how you see it? You didn't just slip and fall. You chose to betray me." You made a conscious decision to pursue this man, to hide it from me, from our kids. That's not a mistake. That's a betrayal." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she struggled to find the right words. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but I still love you. I never wanted to lose you. It was never about that. It was about me feeling lost and finding someone who made me feel alive again." James shook his head, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "But you didn't just lose yourself. You lost us. You've shattered our trust, and I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The silence that followed was deafening, the reality of their situation hanging heavy in the air. James wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything that could relieve the tension building inside him. Instead, he felt like he was standing on a precipice, looking down into the abyss of uncertainty. That night, as James lay in bed, he couldn't escape the feeling of despair that enveloped him. The betrayal weighed heavily on his heart, and the thought of what could happen next gnawed at him. He needed to make a decision, one that would shape the future of their family and determine whether they could rebuild or if it was time to part ways. In the days that followed, James took the time to reflect on what he wanted. He needed to find clarity amidst the chaos, to understand whether he could forgive Emily and rebuild their marriage, or if the damage was too severe to mend. The kids' well-being remained at the forefront of his mind. He wanted to protect them from further pain, but he also knew that they needed to see their parents navigate this difficult time with honesty and integrity. After several days of soul-searching, James approached Emily again. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about everything, and I need to know if you're willing to fight for our family. I need to know if you're committed to repairing the damage you've caused." Emily's expression softened, and he could see a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes, James. I'm willing to go to counseling, to work on myself, and to prove to you that I want us back. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words wash over him. "It's going to take time, and it won't be easy. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and I need to know you're ready for that journey." "I am," she replied earnestly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'll fight for us. I promise." As he looked into her eyes, James felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of possibility that perhaps they could find their way back to each other. It wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try. For the sake of their family, for Ethan and Sarah, and for the love that had once defined their lives, he would take that leap of faith. As the new year approached, James felt a simmering rage within him that he struggled to contain. Despite the efforts to rebuild his relationship with Emily through therapy, the pain of her betrayal gnawed at him like a relentless hunger. The image of her laughing with another man haunted him, and the thought of revenge became an intoxicating allure he could not shake off. One evening, while sitting alone in his study, James found himself scrolling through his phone, lost in thoughts of Emily's infidelity. Every message, every notification felt like a reminder of her betrayal. He couldn't help but think of the man who had taken his wife from him. Who was he? What was so special about him that Emily had chosen to throw away their life together? James felt the anger rise again, fueling his desire for revenge. He began to consider the possibilities. Could he confront the man directly? Or perhaps expose Emily's indiscretion in a way that would force her to feel the same humiliation and pain she had inflicted on him? The idea excited him, yet a part of him felt the weight of guilt creeping in. "Revenge isn't who I am," he muttered to himself, but the words felt hollow. The betrayal had awakened a dark side within him that he had long kept buried. As the days passed, James took it upon himself to gather information about the man Emily had been seeing. He began by discreetly watching her phone habits, noting the times she would receive messages that made her smile. He noticed how her demeanor changed whenever she received a notification from a certain contact. Driven by curiosity and rage, James delved deeper into the investigation. He created a fake social media profile, using it to search for information about Emily's affair. He discovered the man's name, Mark. He was a colleague of Emily's at the dental clinic, a charming younger man who had an undeniable appeal. The more James learned about Mark, the more his anger boiled. He learned about the casual interactions they had shared, the flirty banter, and the late-night texts. With each new piece of information, The plan for revenge solidified in James's mind. He would confront Mark, make him understand the pain he had caused, and hold him accountable for his actions. One fateful evening, after weeks of brooding, James decided it was time to act. He texted Mark, asking to meet him under the guise of wanting to discuss a work-related matter. Mark responded quickly, eager to engage, completely unaware of the storm that awaited him. They agreed to meet at a bar downtown, a dimly lit place that had a reputation for being discreet. As James arrived, he felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He ordered a drink, his heart pounding in anticipation of the confrontation. When Mark walked in, James couldn't help but notice the ease with which he carried himself. He was dressed sharply, exuding confidence, and James felt a surge of resentment wash over him. This was the man who had disrespected his family, who had invaded his life without remorse. "Hey, James. Thanks for meeting me," Mark said, flashing a disarming smile as he approached the bar. James forced a smile in return, his heart racing. "Thanks for coming, Mark. I wanted to talk about something important." As they settled into their seats, James steeled himself for the confrontation. He needed to maintain his composure while delivering the words he had rehearsed in his mind. "I heard some interesting things about you and Emily." Mark raised an eyebrow, curiosity flashing across his face. "Oh, what do you mean?" James leaned forward, locking eyes with Mark, the anger simmering just below the surface. "I know about the affair. I know you've been seeing my wife behind my back." The shift in Mark's demeanor was immediate. The confident smile faded, replaced by a look of surprise mixed with guilt. I didn't think you knew," he stammered, glancing around the bar as if searching for an escape. James could feel the satisfaction rising within him. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "You think this is some kind of game? You think you can just waltz in and take what's mine?" Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the bravado melting away. "I didn't mean to hurt you, James. Emily and I, it just happened. We connected on a different level." "A different level?" James echoed, his voice rising in anger. "You had no right to connect with her. She's my wife. You're a coward for hiding behind her while destroying our family." Mark's expression turned defensive. "Look, I didn't force her to do anything. If she wanted to be with you, she would have. Maybe you should be asking her why she chose to be with me." James felt a surge of rage at Mark's words. "You think this is about me and Emily? You're the one who made a choice to pursue a married woman. You're the one who should be ashamed." The tension in the air crackled as James leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "I want you to stay away from my family. You need to understand the damage you've caused. If I find out you're still contacting her, I won't hesitate to expose everything. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything." Mark's face paled, and he nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. "I understand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'll back off." James felt a rush of power as he watched Mark squirm, but it was quickly overshadowed by the lingering emptiness in his heart. He had taken a step toward revenge, but it didn't bring him the satisfaction he had hoped for. Instead, it left him feeling hollow, as if he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. As they parted ways, James felt the weight of his actions settle heavily on his shoulders. Revenge had offered a momentary high, but now he was left grappling with the consequences of his choices. He returned home, feeling a mix of triumph and despair, knowing that the path forward would be anything but easy. In the days that followed, James wrestled with the aftermath of his confrontation with Mark. He had delivered his message, but it hadn't brought the closure he had envisioned. Instead, he felt a growing emptiness within him, as if the revenge he sought had only deepened the chasm in his heart. Emily remained unaware of the encounter, focused on their therapy sessions and the effort to rebuild their relationship. James struggled to reconcile his feelings of anger with the desire to heal. He knew that revenge wouldn't erase the pain of betrayal, nor would it restore the trust they had lost. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, James felt the urge to confess. He wanted Emily to know about his confrontation with Mark, to understand the lengths he had gone to in order to protect their family. But the words caught in his throat, the fear of how she would react holding him back. "James, are you okay?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You seem distant." He forced a smile, the facade becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "I'm fine, just thinking about everything." But deep down, he knew he needed to confront his feelings, to address the darkness that had taken root within him. The revenge he had sought had not only been against Mark, but also against himself. He needed to break free from the cycle of anger and pain before it consumed him entirely. As he lay in bed that night, he stared at the ceiling, contemplating the future. Revenge had momentarily fueled him, but now it was time to focus on healing, not just for himself, but for Emily, for their children, and for the family they were trying to rebuild. As winter melted into spring, James stood at a crossroads. The anger that had fueled his desire for revenge was beginning to wane, replaced by a profound sense of weariness. He had confronted Mark, yet the confrontation had only intensified the turmoil within him. The image of Emily with another man still haunted him, but he was growing tired of the bitterness that had taken root in his heart. James realized that if he wanted to heal, not just for himself but for Emily and their family, he needed to let go of the anger that threatened to consume him. It was time to confront the truth of his feelings and the reality of their marriage. One evening, after a long day at work, James returned home to find Emily sitting in the living room, a stack of papers spread out before her. She was working on her taxes, but as soon as she saw him, her face lit up with a smile. It was the kind of smile that had once filled him with warmth, but now felt tinged with the weight of their shared history. "Hey, how was your day?" Emily asked, her tone light and cheerful. "Busy," James replied, forcing a smile as he took a seat across from her. He watched as she scribbled notes, the sound of her pen against the paper both familiar and unsettling. "Are you ready for our session tomorrow?" she asked, her eyes searching his for reassurance. James hesitated, contemplating the path they were on. "I think so, but there's something I need to discuss with you first." Emily's expression shifted, concern washing over her features. "What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, James knew this was the moment to address everything. "I confronted Mark," he said, his voice steady. Emily's eyes widened in shock. "You what?" "I met him at a bar. I told him to stay away from you, that he's done enough damage," James admitted, watching as confusion morphed into a mixture of fear and relief on her face. "I didn't want you to get hurt any more than you already have," he continued, his heart racing. "But I thought it was important for you to know." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "James, you shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." He waved a hand dismissively, feeling a mix of anger and vulnerability. "It's not about that. I'm angry, and I don't want to feel this way anymore. I need to understand why you made the choices you did." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I've already told you. It wasn't just about Mark. It was about me feeling disconnected. I never wanted to hurt you. I was searching for something that was missing in our relationship." James leaned back, processing her words. "I get that, but it doesn't excuse what you did. I feel like I've been living in this shadow, consumed by rage. It's exhausting." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to change, James. I want to fight for us, but I also need you to be honest with me about your feelings." As the conversation continued, they began to peel back the layers of their relationship, confronting not only the betrayal, but also the distance that had grown between them. They spoke openly about their feelings, fears, and hopes for the future, realizing that they both had to take responsibility for the state of their marriage. "I want to forgive you, but it's going to take time," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to work through this anger and resentment. It's not going to disappear overnight." Emily nodded, her expression earnest. "I'll do whatever it takes. I want to prove to you that I'm committed to our family. I don't want to lose you." After their heartfelt conversation, James decided it was time to take proactive steps toward healing. They agreed to not only continue their therapy sessions, but also to implement new practices into their daily lives to strengthen their bond. They began scheduling regular check-in conversations, where they would set aside time each week to discuss their feelings and any concerns. This practice allowed them to communicate openly without the fear of judgment or anger. It was a small but significant step toward rebuilding their trust. In addition, they started going on weekly date nights, rediscovering the joy of spending time together outside of their roles as parents. One Friday evening, they went to a local restaurant, laughing over shared memories and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. It was a reminder of the love that had initially brought them together. Despite the progress they were making, the past still loomed over them. One evening, James sat in their bedroom, staring at a photo of their family taken before everything fell apart. The smiles on their faces felt like a distant memory, a life untouched by betrayal. He knew he needed to face the anger and pain he had been holding on to. As he prepared for another therapy session, he made a commitment to address his feelings head-on. When they arrived at Dr. Simmons' office, he felt a surge of determination. "Today, I want to talk about my anger," James announced as they settled into their seats. "I've been holding on to it, and it's affecting everything." Dr. Simmons nodded, encouraging him to share. "That's an important step. Let's explore that anger and how it's impacting your healing process." James took a deep breath, allowing himself to be vulnerable. "I'm angry at Emily for cheating, but I'm also angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I feel betrayed, and it's like I'm constantly living in the shadow of that betrayal." As they delved into his feelings, James began to unravel the complexity of his emotions. He learned that anger, while valid, could also cloud his judgment and hinder the healing process. Through guided discussion, he began to see the path forward, not just in forgiving Emily, but in forgiving himself. By the end of the session, James felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step toward letting go of the pain that had been holding him captive. That evening, after their therapy session, James and Emily sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues. The air was crisp, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves around them. "Today felt different," Emily said, glancing at him with a hopeful expression. "I could see you beginning to let go of some of that anger." "I think it's a good sign." James nodded, contemplating her words. "I'm trying. I realize that holding on to this anger isn't just hurting me. It's hurting us. I don't want to live like this anymore." Emily reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I want you to know I'm here for you. I'll always fight for us." He squeezed her hand, feeling the connection between them strengthen. In that moment, he understood that healing wouldn't happen overnight. But with each step they took together, they were reclaiming their love. As the weeks passed, James and Emily continued to navigate the ups and downs of their journey. They faced challenges, moments of doubt, and lingering questions about their future. But through it all, they remained committed to the healing process, learning to communicate better and support each other in ways they hadn't before. James knew that the path ahead would still be rocky, but he felt a renewed sense of hope. The revenge he had once sought had given way to a deeper understanding of himself and his marriage. He had chosen to embrace healing, not just for himself but for Emily and their family. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, watching a movie, James felt a sense of peace envelop him. He looked over at Emily, who was laughing at a scene on screen, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that the love they had built was worth fighting for. With each passing day, they were learning to trust again, finding joy in the little things, and forging a new chapter in their lives. Together, they were not just rebuilding a marriage. They were rediscovering the love that had brought them together in the first place.